Hello, and welcome to another episode of Do Yourself No Harm, the podcast that helps you to prevent, manage, and recover from burnout, and to help you manage your stress and overwhelm using evidence-based tools. I'm Dr. Claire Ashley. I'm a practicing GP, I'm a burnout survivor and expert. If you enjoy this episode, please hit like and subscribe. And if you'd like to find out more about how I can help you or different ways of working with me, then please check out my website, which is www.drclaireashley.com. You could also join my free Facebook group, The Burnout Doctor, or if you'd like to receive a monthly package from me with some self-care goodies and a book in it every month, then please feel free to come and look at my website about my subscription box, which is www.doyourselfnoharm.com. All of these links will be shared in the show's description. I've got lots of exciting things that I'm going to be launching this autumn, including my burnout course, webinars, and lots more to come with the subscription box. So follow me to be the first to know what's happening. I'm also uploading videos of the podcast to YouTube. So if you prefer to watch rather than listen, then please come and follow my YouTube channel, which is Dr. Claire Ashley, the Burnout Doctor. So let's crack on with today's podcast episode. It is the bank holiday Monday today in the UK, and as we approach the end of the summer, and goodness, I don't know what it's been like for you guys, but for me it has been long, super hot, and a massive slog. Hopefully it won't have been like that for you guys, but it might well have been, particularly if you are burnt out. I'm going to talk today about why holidays are not a cure for burnout, how to plan your holidays and breaks during the working day to help prevent and manage burnout as well. So we're going to be talking about a tale of two holidays today, starting with a so-called holiday that I had just before I hit crisis point in my burnout. Now, this holiday was possibly the worst holiday that I've ever had, and it came at exactly the wrong point for me in my burnout. And I had a lot of anger and a lot of frustration around it for some period of time. And I really blamed that holiday for a lot of the issues that I had, and it was totally wrong for me to do that. Now, if you follow me on Instagram, you might recall this story as I have previously shared it on my feed, but I'm going to share it with you guys again today. So in the summer of 2019, we headed off on our family summer holiday. It was going to be a camping holiday in Cornwall. Now, I didn't know it at the time, and I didn't even realise that there was a name for the desperation that I felt at that time, but I was shortly about to hit crisis point in my burnout. And the only way really to describe what was going on inside my head at the time was that I really felt that I was on the brink of a breakdown. And I think I've been talking to my husband for a while about how I felt that I was walking this tightrope and the slightest thing might push me over the edge. I felt that I was really incapable of spinning all the plates and the responsibilities that I had of working as a newly qualified GP and having the kids and our house being a renovation project and all the other things that were going on in my life at the time. And inside my head, I was feeling a mixture of complete and utter despondency, anxiety, panic, loss of enjoyment in anything that I did, and I was a complete shell of the person that I had been previously. I didn't recognize what I was, and I didn't know at the time that there was a name for what I was experiencing. Obviously, I now recognize it as me sliding into burnout, but at the time I didn't know what was happening. I just knew that things were really massively wrong. And what I'd kind of done is I'd fixated on this holiday as something that was really key to making me feel better. And as we drove down the M5, if you're not from the UK, the M5 is basically the motorway that goes down to the southwest of the UK. It's basically the one main road into the southwest, becomes a car park at the height of summer. I remember saying to my husband that I really desperately needed this holiday to be a good one. And I think what I was trying to put across to him was just how bad I felt and how I just needed a quick fix and I just needed something to make me feel better. But he didn't give me that validation. And actually what happened was he turned to me and he said that I was putting too much pressure on the holiday to give me the answers and the fix that I was craving. And I was furious with him, like really, really angry. I don't know if I articulated that, but inside I was absolutely fuming. I was so angry. I didn't understand why he couldn't get what I was feeling inside my head, how utterly desperate things were in my head, and how I really desperately needed this holiday to fix myself. So obviously I was putting a lot of kind of quite pressure on this holiday that just wasn't, it was never, even if it was going to be a good holiday, it was never going to be the holiday that I needed. It wasn't going to be the fix that I needed. So on this journey down to Cornwall, my husband got a call from work, and I think he spent a couple of nights with us, and then off he went. We were in our camper van, leaving me and the children. Now, he was at a very early stage in his career. He's a stuntman, for those of you that don't know, and we were at the stage where he wasn't really able to turn down work because he wasn't really well established. So it was the right thing for him to do, but it was absolutely not the right thing for me, because I think even if the holiday had gone well, there were a few problems with the campsite. For instance, it was advertised as being like right on a Cornish beach, which when I booked it, I was like, fantastic, we'll just roll out the camper onto the beach, brilliant. It was actually a half-hour walk over sand dunes, with my son at the time was like 3 years old, I think, and he wouldn't walk for that distance. So we had a buggy that we had to like drag across these dunes. It was the only way to access this beach. And my daughter as well, I think she was 5. Like, so we had all of the beach paraphernalia, plus a toddler that wouldn't walk, a buggy that we had to drag across. So it wasn't ideal anyway. But unfortunately, being British and the Great British Summer, it wasn't great weather. And this was the thing that really undid the holiday for me. So Ben went off to work, leaving me and the kids in the camper van. And in typical British fashion, we experienced absolutely torrential rain, which was so bad that we actually had rain running down the inside of the vehicle. And the electrics in our camper van to this day are still not right following this holiday. So I was basically on my own in the middle of a field in the pitch black overnight with 2 young children, and my phone signal as well was absolutely terrible. So I didn't have a way of like calling for help. Not that Ben could come and help us anyway. He was literally hundreds of miles away. Nowhere to go, and a camper van that was not waterproof. It was just a disaster. And I'd pitched an awning, we'd pitched an awning as well, so I couldn't drive back home. Everything was wet. Everything was absolutely soaked through. I was meant to be sleeping in the awning. Obviously, that couldn't happen. In the end, what I did is I put the lid of the camper van down to seal it. Me and the kids just slept on the bed that was in the downstairs bit. The day after, everything was ruined. So there were problems with the electrics in the van, obviously because water had got in and affected some of the electrical workings of the van. Everything was soaked, like literally everything was like absolutely drenched. And I couldn't get signal on my phone to find alternative accommodation. And I also couldn't drive home because everything was so wet. Everything had got like soaked and expanded. And because we'd pitched an awning, I didn't know how to take it down. So I couldn't unpitch it and then just throw everything in the back and drive home. And I felt so... I can't even describe how I felt at the time. I couldn't decide internally whether or not to have an absolute meltdown or whether just to completely shut down. And the only reason why I didn't lose it was because I was the only adult with my children. And I came very, very close to having a total breakdown, I think. And I had to use every fibre of my being, and bearing in mind that I was completely depleted at this point as well, not to have a total meltdown in front of my children. As it happened, I think they were kind of like rabbit in headlights. They knew that mummy was having a big stress. And I was actually trying really hard not to lose it in front of them because I didn't want them to be scared, you know. Now, I'm normally a coper. Like, I'm really good at problem solving. I'm really good at sorting out things that arise unexpectedly, but my coping strategies weren't there because obviously I was at the height of my burnout. So I was distraught, I was furious, I was completely unable to problem solve. I was numb at the same time, which is really weird to experience, but that is one of the things that happens with burnout, is you get that disconnect and that loss of empathy. And I blamed my husband for leaving to deal with that particular problem on my own. And further to that, I was absolutely bereft that this holiday that was meant to relieve my stress and make me feel better had turned out to be a total soggy nightmare. But I also knew at the same time that my behavior and my emotions were completely out of character, but I couldn't control my emotions at all. This is one of the things that happens with burnout actually, is you can't regulate your responses to stress in the same way that you could have done previously. So your emotional responses to stress and your physical responses to stress are completely dysregulated. And I was absolutely experiencing that. Couldn't control it, and I didn't know how to problem solve my way out of it. Now, in normal times, pre-burnout, if that had happened to me, it would have been a blip. It would have been quite stressful, but I would have problem solved and I would have come up with a solution, and it wouldn't have affected me that deeply. But looking back, I know that the burnout stopped me from dealing with that problem. As what happened, actually, which I didn't share on Instagram, was my phone intermittently had 4G. So I managed to find an Airbnb locally. It was the height of summer, so trying to find accommodation in Cornwall last minute, game over. It's not going to happen. It's a nightmare. But basically, I found somewhere that had bell tents, and they had a block that you could go and have showers in. And what I did was I basically abandoned all of our drenched stuff in the campsite and just drove to this bell tent. We spent a couple of nights there, and then I went home. I don't know if the next thing I should really share with you, but I'm going to do it anyway. I was so burnt out that I couldn't face going back down to pick all our stuff up. So Ben had to go and pick up our stuff at the end of what would have been our holiday week once he'd finished work, which I do feel a bit bad about, but I wasn't able to deal with it. That's how burnt out I was. I couldn't deal with sorting out all the stuff that had happened. I just had to remove myself from it. I'm not proud of how I dealt with that, but that's just how disordered my thinking was and how unable I was to cope with that stress. And then I very shortly hit crisis point after I returned home and went straight back to work after that terrible, terrible week. You'll be pleased to hear that we're not divorced yet. Me and my husband have moved on from it. Actually, I think he was one of the reasons why I realised that I was hitting crisis point, because very shortly after that he was like, what is happening to you? He was one of the people that helped me realise that. But at that particular moment, I wasn't in a position to recognise it, despite the fact that my behaviour was really, really out of character. Anyway, so why am I sharing this with you? Well, firstly, one of the issues highlighted here is that I was well on the way to burnout, and yet I had no insight into what was happening or how to manage it, even though I was very, very dysfunctional. I was convinced that a short break would fix the awfulness in my head, but I couldn't have been more wrong. My husband was right. I did put too much pressure on that holiday to make me feel better. But to be honest with you, even if I think that holiday had gone well, I just don't think it would have been enough. As you can tell from what I've described about this holiday, my thinking was so disordered and my emotional and physical responses to stress were so dysregulated that even if things had gone all right, just my head was in such a mess. What I needed was far greater than what a few days by the beach could have given me. And what about other people that are burnt out? Well, here's the thing. An Israeli study showed that burnt out doctors that went on holiday did temporarily feel better on holiday, but on returning to work, their symptoms of burnout returned almost immediately. This makes sense to me. On holiday, you're away from the cause of your burnout, but on returning, you're straight back into the fire. So, of course, any positive effects of your holiday are immediately going to evaporate. Now, one of my favourite quotes about burnout is, if a canary dies in the toxic environment of the mine, what you don't need is a more resilient canary. And this stands so true when thinking about holidays and burnout. Burnout doesn't magically get better because of a week off or a lovely holiday. Burnout recovery is really complex and nuanced, and holiday isn't going to cut it. The average recovery period is 1 to 3 years, according to the data. And if you've done your maths, you'll know that I'm now 3 years into my burnout recovery. It is essential that you find ways of working that are sustainable on a day-to-day basis, rather than living for a short break that's planned in the future. A holiday alone cannot fix you. Recovery is hard, it is complex, and it needs to be multifaceted. So when you're thinking about holidays and burnout, you can't wait for a big holiday. You need to do the work prior to going on holiday. You can't assume that a holiday is going to fix you. And if you are thinking about preventing burnout as well, again, a holiday is not going to be the answer either. But there are ways that you can think about your holidays and change them up to both prevent and manage burnout as well. And that's what we're going to talk about now. So let's talk about how to time your holidays. Like, how long should they be? How often should you take them in order to prevent and manage burnout? So the data around holidays and burnout suggests that it is better to take regular short breaks than to wait for one long annual holiday, for instance. Okay, now this might be tricky for some of you to organise, particularly if you're a doctor. So often we really struggle to get our annual leave approved, or you might be on a rota where your annual leave is fixed and you have no choice as to when you take your holidays. Even in primary care, it can be really difficult to organise as well. So a lot of GPs have young children, and so we're all kind of, we all want to have time off in the summer holidays, and that can be really tricky to organise. Particularly at the moment, we have a shortage of GPs, and you obviously need to have cover. You need to have GPs in surgery during the holidays to cover for colleagues that are off on annual leave. So medicine is a really tricky job to organise holidays in. I remember giving over a year's notice for my honeymoon, which at the time was the only 2-week break that I had asked for in the entirety of my training. And I remember my supervisor physically recoiling when I asked for 2 weeks off. I did get those 2 weeks off, but I really paid for it because I had to make up all of my on calls. So the 2 weeks before my wedding and my honeymoon, the 2 weeks after were really, really grim. And that took a lot to organise that. And I'm sure that a lot of you that are medics will identify with how hard it is to organise holidays as a doctor. But I think the take home from the data is that if you can organise it, regular short breaks are better for your mental health than one long annual holiday. All right. And further to this, the evidence also suggests that regular short breaks interspersed throughout your working day are better than working through or taking a single break in the middle of the day. Now, again, depending on what job you do, this can be difficult to organise, but it might be achievable. And there are benefits to productivity and your performance at work with taking lots of short breaks rather than one long run as well. So it's not just your mental health that benefits, but also your performance at work. Okay, so I started by saying that this podcast was going to be a tale of two holidays. So I'm going to share with you the holiday that we went on earlier this year, which was a complete contrast to the holiday that we had in Cornwall 3 years ago. So earlier this year, my family and I finally went on our first family holiday for 2 years and our first trip abroad for 6 years. And it was one of those trips that had been postponed because of the pandemic. So we were very, very happy and grateful to get away. And we didn't actually organise very much. And I was very mindful before we went that we might not even be able to go because of the COVID rules of the country that we were going to. There was a risk that if one of us tested positive for COVID on arrival, because they did lateral flows on arrival, that we'd be put into a quarantine hotel for the duration of our holiday. So there was a little bit of risk associated with it. And just bearing in mind the previous disastrous holidays that we'd had and the fact that it had been the pandemic, we didn't plan anything. I didn't have any expectations. And I didn't want it to be a disappointment in the same way that the Burnout holiday had been. But I have to say, it was the first holiday that I've had for years where I actually came away from it feeling refreshed, feeling rejuvenated. I didn't think about work once whilst I was there. I made an active decision to turn off all my social media, to mute all of my WhatsApp groups, to not check my emails, etc. And actually, I'm still feeling the effects of that holiday, I think now, but then I am that much further along in my burnout recovery. So I'm now 3 years into it. And actually, the things that have made a difference to my burnout recovery have been being under practitioner health and having the support of a GP through my recovery, doing a lot of intensive therapy with my therapist and making a lot of changes to how I work, those have been the things that have made a difference to my burnout recovery, not this holiday. So the holiday really was kind of the icing on the cake and something that I really enjoyed, but I didn't use it as a way to manage my burnout. And I think that's the way to view holidays, is you can't use them as a tool to manage your burnout. And whilst taking lots of regular short holiday breaks and lots of breaks during your working day will help prevent and manage burnout, actually the majority of the work has to be done outside of holidays, unfortunately. But I have to say, I am in a really good place. It feels like the old Claire is back. And as a result, I got the most out of that trip. So rather than the trip doing the work for me, the work had been done. And as a result, I could enjoy it. It felt like a proper holiday. And honestly, it was wonderful. So I hope that you have enjoyed today's episode, and I hope that wherever you are and whatever you've done this summer, that you have had the opportunity for some proper downtime. As we head into the autumn, it might be the part of the year where you might be able to take the opportunity for more regular breaks, either during your working day and outside of it. And that might well make a difference in your burnout, but also for your productivity as well. Thanks for listening. I do hope you've enjoyed this episode, and if you have, please hit like and subscribe.